Alright, we are going to be starting the journey towards the radiology exam. And so the journey begins within the lungs. Unfortunately, today's disclaimer is that the department have decided what a great decision it is to not give any lectures that inform us about the lungs. The first 8 or 9 lectures we do not have access to, which makes our lives a whole lot easier, and it makes my life easier making this video. So this video will not have everything, unfortunately, but I'll have what I say here is an overview, right? It's gonna have most things here, hopefully enough to give you a good idea of things you need to know for the lungs. All right, so without more further ado, let's start. Firstly, A to E. You already know A to E because you have watched a million videos on it. So I'm not going to baton about it too much, but when you see, so here is a normal lung. You can see the nice sharp CP angle. You can see 5 to 6 anterior lungs, which you should, and diaphragms are nice and humpy, okay, which you should see. When we look at our A to E, we look at A for airways. Is it symmetrical? If it's not, if it's deviated, is it atelectasis or is it pneumothorax? I.e., is there a volume problem? Is there a volume overload? Is there a volume deficiency? Breathing, look at each lobe of the lung. Can you see any problems? Why don't you look at the hilar region? Can you see any problems? Bones, look at the ribs, look at how many ribs there are, if they're too many or too little. Diaphragm can actually inform us of quite a lot of things. Shifting, when I say shifting, I mean to do with, let me get my pen, but when I say this, I mean subpulmonic shifting, subpulmonic effusion. All right. Now my pen isn't working for some reason. Come on, pen. It was actually working a second ago, but it's not. All right, forget it. So shifting, I mean subpulmonic effusion. All right. So what do I mean by subpulmonic effusion? Well, it's in the word sub, beneath, pulmonic, lung, under the lung. Where under the lung? This effusion accumulates between the diaphragm and the base of the lung. All right. So basically, the lung is floating on a body of water, which is the effusion, and because of this, you'll see. Oh my god, man. Alright, I've got it. I got my pen back. Alright. So here you'll see a shifting of the peak. So imagine this is without shifting, and this red here indicates an actual shifting of the hemidiaphragm. But the diaphragm, I can't say it, diaphragm, there's no problem in the diaphragm. It's just this effusion that's given the illusion that the diaphragm has actually shifted when it hasn't. It's just the actual effusion that's caused this illusion. So this is the shifting in the hemidiaphragm, the singular half diaphragm. Because effusions usually happen in one side of the lung. It doesn't really happen in both sides. At least to my knowledge, my limited knowledge. All right. Also, blunting. This goes hand in hand with shifting or hand in hand with effusions. When you have blunting, you want to look at the CP angle, which is here. Basically, if you see blunting, look for the CP angle, and yeah, basically just look for the angle. If there's not a sharp depression, and if it's filled with fluid, then there's effusion. Speaking of effusion, according to the lecturer, there can be anterior and posterior. Posterior is more early phase, anterior is more late phase, i.e. more severe. So effusions start posteriorly, building up, moving anteriorly, building up, and then whatever. Focusing more on the diaphragms. Diaphragms can give us a little bit more detail on diseases. First of which, if you have bilateral depression, bilateral flattening of the diaphragm, all right? So just to show you here, I'm just going to write it down, flattening. All right, so you have flattening with diaphragms, diaphragm, from whatever you call it. So emphysema is a bilateral disease. So with the diaphragm, you can see bilateral flattening, all right? As you can see, what I've shown you in red over here and over here, you can see that the diaphragm is not humped, it's not peaked, it's very flat. This is one of the characteristics of emphysema. But obviously, don't just look at the diaphragm and just make a conclusion. Look at the lung itself, and you can see, if there is any radiolucency, if there is any, if there's no lung markings, then yeah, you can assume it's emphysema. But treat this as an accompanying method of trying to figure out what's wrong with the lungs. Secondly, it can tell us about unilateral diseases. So emphysema was bilateral. Unilateral can be things like pneumothorax. Pneumothorax is unilateral, and again, same concept. You can see here on the non-affected side of the lung, you can see a nice hump. That's good. We want to see a nice hump. And when you look at the affected side, you can see a flattening diaphragm here, and you can be like, all right, there's a problem here. There's definitely a problem here. What can we also see? Oh, we also see some, radiolucency, this shadowing. There's no lung markings. All right, it's probably pneumothorax. And when you think of pneumothorax, all right, let's look at the trachea. Is there tension? Is it moving towards the other side? Or is it staying the same? Is it just a normal closed or open pneumothorax? Yada, 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 you know what I mean. Next, pathologies. Pathologies can be lucent or opaque. Lucent just means lucent, radiolucent. Being not opaque, see-through. Opaque, you can't see through it. Lucency can be pneumothorax or a ring shadow. Ring shadow is things like cysts, things like evacuated cysts, TB, which has been evacuated, things like that. Basically, the only lucent part of this lesion is the periphery. The actual contents within, that's the lucent part. Opacity, you have all these other opacities you can learn, all right? They can be focal, they can be general, unilateral, bilateral. Also, one thing I want to mention is extra pathologies, complex shadows. You can have complex shadows. You can have ring shadows or air fluid shadows, ring shadows I've just mentioned here. And air fluid is just, look at a lung. Do you see horizontal lines? Do you see a horizontal line? Yes, it's an air fluid shadow. All right. But you want to see if it's in the pleural cavity or not, because it can be in the pleural cavity and it can be horizontal. So let me just pump the brakes for a second. When you see a pleural effusion, there's going to be something called a meniscus sign. This kind of U-shaped sign effusion you'll see. That's just because there is no air. If there is air, a hydropneumothorax, you'll see this horizontal depression. So don't get it twisted, brother. All right, don't get it twisted. But if you do see an air fluid shadow, this lesion within the lungs, maybe from a partially evacuated abscess, which we'll see later, which is caused by Pseudomonas aeruginosa, then you can conclude it's an air fluid shadow. All right, let's move on. Next, diseases you should know. There's a reason I say you should know it, because the teacher said she didn't actually say it, but she taught us all these things. All right, so firstly, diseases, inflammatory diseases. If you get a question saying, oh, what's the 2 types of inflammatory diseases or inflammatory bacteria? Just be like, all right, there's strep and there's staph, more specifically Staph aureus and strep pyogenes or pneumonia. She mentioned pyogenes when she was talking about this topic. All right, so there's a lot of things I want to say, to be honest, but there's a lot of things I need to cover, so I'm going to keep it brief. Strep causes pneumonia generally, and this pneumonia can occur, according to Google and a lot of sources, it can appear anywhere, this pneumonia, and this pneumonia is lobar meaning confined to a lobe, and this lobar pneumonia is usually triangular in shape. All right. One thing I want to mention is the complications. Bronchiectasis is a complication. Abscess is a complication. Also, one thing she mentioned in the lecture is the idea that transmission can occur through pores, and a pore, which you should have in your mind, the name of which is called cone. Not coney, cone. The pores of cone. And the pores of cone is basically a passageway between adjacent alveoli. That's how this spreads. Now, if we focus on staph causes bronchopneumonia. Bronchopneumonia is localized to the lower lobes, and also bronchopneumonia is a more patchy disease of the lung. However, lobar is a more homogeneous, more radio-opaque disease. One big thing to differentiate these 2 diseases is the phenomenon of air bronchogram. Air bronchogram is basically a phenomenon in which you have patent airways within the consolidation. So, if we talk about bronchopneumonia does have air bronchograms. B. Yeah, that's the way to remember it. Bronchopneumonia has bronchograms. Pneumonia caused by strep does not have it. All right, simple, good. Whew. That was just one thing. Let me just get rid of all this. Now, this is where things get a bit more annoying. All right, so next, like I said, Pseudomonas, just, there's so many, I don't even know where to start with these things. Like I said, we haven't been given lectures, so I can only give you the minimum, and hopefully we are tested on the minimum and not the maximum. Pseudomonas aeruginosa causes cyst formation, lung abscess or cyst. Yeah. Okay, and yeah, if you see an air fluid shadow as well, think of Pseudomonas. If a question says something along the lines of which bacteria causes cavitations, think of staph, think of strep, think of TB. I also want to add something Okay. I don't think the teacher mentioned, probably she did, but this is true. Meaning Klebsiella, can also cause cavitations, but these teachers, they don't like overcomplications, so let's keep it to these three. When we do talk about Klebsiella, though, one thing definitely, if anything, to know about Klebsiella is something called bulging fissure sign. I think I have a picture of this, but basically this means that obviously the lungs have fissures. These fissures can actually move due to the buildup of this consolidation within the lungs, and so this shifting and bulging of the fissure is the bulging fissure sign, which is associated with Klebsiella. Next, silicosis. I think I have a picture of this as well. You'll get here upper lobe opacities, and with the more exposure and more time, you would get this eggshell calcifications, which is seen at the lymph nodes, i.e. the hilar lymph nodes. Next, something you probably were expecting, TB. Again, so much information, I don't know where to start. I'm just trying to get my pen out again if it lets me. All right, it's not letting me again. All right, so TB. All right, so you can have primary TB and secondary TB. Primary TB is basically TB someone gets when they have never got it before and they've just gotten it. Now, primary TB can happen anywhere in the lungs. All right, it can happen anywhere in the lungs. So let's just draw a lung here. Yeah, so it can happen wherever in the lung. Okay. Now, primary TB is usually asymptomatic. All right, you will not find any cavitations here, right? So with primary TB, your immune system is relatively, all right in trying to trap the TB, and sometimes it can even kill it. It can get rid of it, but also what can happen is two things: the TB can undergo latency or dormancy, and if there is some immunocompromisation, you can get secondary, or what can happen is it can just multiply there and then. And yeah, this is more rare though. So yeah, primary TB has, you can have three things. Gun focus. Gun focus is basically just your granulomatous infection. All right, you form this TB granuloma, and over time you get this caseous necrosis. Or you just get this latency, and through immunocompromisation, you can begin getting this caseous necrosis leading to cavitations. All right, next is a gone complex. So usually I've heard, so when I was in the lecture back in the day, all right, the teacher always mentioned what is the TB always associated with, and always she said lymphadenitis, lymphangitis. All right, and I was thinking, why is it? Basically, gone complex is the reason. So you'll see in the next one or two slides. So basically, again, I'm just gonna draw a lung. So say I get a granulomatous infection here. What can happen is this can actually travel through the lymph channel and get to the lymph node here. All right. So what's going to happen? The macrophage is obviously going to uptake it and drain it all the way to the lymph node, and etc., etc. But along this way, these things can become infected, the actual pipelines and the lymph node. So what can happen? Lymphangitis is the inflammation of the actual pipes, the actual lymph channels, and lymphadenitis is the actual inflammation of the lymph nodes. Lymphadenitis, lymphangitis is associated with what? TB. On top of that, you can have other associations. Just to keep in mind, you can have pneumonia as well, consolidation. All right, and usually, I should have mentioned TB. I know I said it can happen anywhere, but usually it's in the upper lobes just because of the VQ ratio in that oxygenation is higher in the upper lobes. Now, let's move on to Ranke's complex. Now, Ranke's complex is just a later stage part in which calcification occurs to the Gon complex. Same thing, but now the actual lymph node, the granulomatous lesion is undergoing calcification. Now, if we go to secondary, here through, like I said, a reactivation of the latency period due to immunocompromisation, you could get cavitation. Cavitation can then cause that person to actually get TB within the bronchi and they can expel it, infecting other people, or it can cause miliary TB. Miliary TB is just basically widespread kind of specule pinpoint infection of the lung. All right, so that so secondary is also known as post-primary because it happens after primary, and this occurs in 2 places. Now I'm going to get rid of everything. So this can happen, and I think this is right. So it can happen if we get our lung again. It can happen in 2 places. Number 1, it can happen in the lower lobe of the lower boundary of the upper lung, or the posterior section of the upper lung, and then the superior section of the lower lung. So think of like up is down and down is up. Finally, we have bronchitis. This you have to know. I've seen these questions in the actual past papers as well. Bronchitis has a 3-stage process going from more early stage to late stage. Early stage, it will be partial bronchial stenosis, and this leads to more occlusion. So partial will be partial, complete. This is like atelectasis, i.e. tumor compression or otherwise, and valve bronchial stenosis. This is like later stage, more severe, and this is like associated with emphysema, I think, when you can't get the air out of the lung. Now, let's move on. So here are some pictures, okay? Now, I'm going to recap some of the things I've said. This here is the air bronchogram. Can you remember where do we find air bronchogram? I'll give you a few seconds whilst I zoom in. Can I zoom in? Yes, I can. All right, if you didn't already guess, this is found in bronchopneumonia. All right. In this picture, it does seem to be lobar pneumonia, which kind of throws my theory out the window. But yeah, if it is Lobar pneumonia, then fair enough. But basically, as you can see, wait, is that? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Let me just have a quick check of. No. You know what? Let's just keep that off the table. All right. But like as I was saying, if it is in Lobar pneumonia, you'll find these patent airways, as you can see here. There's these radiolucent kind of patent airways, as you can see, and you can kind of tell it's lobar pneumonia here just because of this kind of triangular kind of pathology. But yeah, here just, you know what, let me just erase this. All right, and I will replace this with this app is absolutely awful. Can I get my... Alright, it's not letting me. Alright, whatever. So just think of this as lobar pneumonia. Here I've shown you bronchopneumonia. Okay? This is what I meant by kind of patchy opacities. And like I said, it's more prevalent in the lower lobes. Here, what can you see? Alright, I'll just give you a few seconds to see. Whilst I try and get my pen again. Alright, if you didn't already get it, you can see horizontal lines. Okay. Now, you can see horizontal lines. And so what does that mean? It means there is an air fluid shadow. And so if there's an abscess in the lungs, it could be associated with what disease, with what oh yeah, I got the pen now. What pathogen? It is Pseudomonas. You can think of aeruginosa. Lobar broncho, and this is a abscess or air fluid shadow. All right, let's move on. Here, can you guess what this is? What both of these are even? All right, you can see that there is calcifications in the hilar region and the upper portion of the lungs. Can you remember what pathology this was? I'll tell you in 3, 2, 1. This was silicosis. You can see the extent of calcification. It looks like eggshell calcification. That's the description. Next, Klebsiella. Klebsiella causes bulging fissure. Now, I am sure in anatomy the fissure was not like this in the red. So this is indicative of bulging fissure. Kleb can also cause pneumonia, can cause apparently can cause cavitations. But like I said, the main thing to know is bulging fissures. Here you can see the TB stages: primary, secondary, gun focus. Like I said, it's just this solitary granulomatous lesion, as you can see here. Gun complex. Now, this is the interesting part. Remember how I said lymphadenitis, lymphangitis? What can you see? Here you can see is the actual gone focus. This is your focus. Here is your hyaloid lymph node. One thing I should have mentioned before, these lymph nodes, hyaloid lymph nodes, can be hilar, yes, but it can also be paratracheal. So the actual TB can spread to hyaloid lymph nodes or paratracheal, so keep that in mind. However, here's your hyaloid lymph node. Here is your gone focus, but what is this in between? This bridge is the pipes connecting the two, and what is that called? Lymphangitis. What is TB associated with? Lymphadenitis Lymphangitis, and also pneumonia and consolidations, but mainly those two. Next, we have secondary TB. Now, like I mentioned, where is secondary TB located? Well, I mentioned that it is in the upper portion and the lower portion. As you can see here, we can see cavitations in the upper portion and lower portion of the lung. Okay, on top of that, with secondary TB, you can see there is this widespread fibrotic kind of spread of TB. All right. We can see, the hyaloid lymph nodes being infiltrated, and we just see a widespread, this patchy consolidation as well. And I should have mentioned as well, consolidations is also prevalent. You can see in the apical part of the lungs. So yeah, that is what you can see in secondary TB. And secondary TB, when you have miliary, it will just all be fine, speck, pinpoint, diffuse TB. Finally, this is the description in which you need to familiarize yourself with when trying to answer a radiographic question. So let's just quickly go through. Method of examination, you'll just say it's a radiographic examination, radiographic or X-ray. Then you say what projection it is. Usually it'll just be facial. Also with facial, you should always do a lateral because you cannot tell if the lesion or the problem is on the front of the body or the back of the body. That's why you do a lateral with it. Okay? And oblique, I'm not too sure why you do that, but yeah, just focus on facial and lateral. And yeah, there's another reason why we do lateral as well, because lateral can actually inform us if there's a problem between biliary problems and kidney problems, like a kidney stone maybe, or a biliary stone. Basically, if such pathology, you find this opacity in front of the spine, in front of the vertebra, it's going to be a biliary problem. If it's in front, basically in line, it's a kidney problem. Localization, obviously you can figure out which part of the lung it is. So mention right lung, left lung, bilateral, unilateral. Is it upper lung, middle lung, lower lung, lower lobe, upper lobe, middle lobe? How many pathologies do you see? 1, 2, 3, multiple. All right. Strength, radiopaque, radiolucent. Yep, I've already mentioned. Shape can be round. Round can be an abscess, some other nodule, a shadow, cyst, ring shadow. Triangular, obviously Lobar Pneumonia. I don't know what an ellipse is. Ring, yep, you know what rings are. Spotted, this is like your miliary TB. Outlines could be sharp, like a lobar pneumonia, well defined. Bronchopneumonia is less defined really because it's more patchy. structure, homogeneous, non-homogeneous, homogeneous. Think of something like a tumor, maybe a lobar pneumonia. Inhomogeneous, maybe some cyst or like a I'm hesitant to say bronchopneumonia, but maybe some cyst. Going back to outlines as well, I should have mentioned ill-defined. It's more associated with malignant tumors, and more well-defined is benign. Dimensions, millimeters or centimeters. And attitude towards the surrounding structures, so if it infiltrates or not. You'll find this in the secondary stage of TB if there's any spreading of the TB. This has been hopefully something comprehensive, something, I've ticked most of the boxes. Obviously, I wouldn't have ticked all of them just because, like I said, we don't have everything at our disposal because of the many strange reasons. I've tried to give you as much, detail about the lungs as possible. It won't be everything. Obviously, this is only just about X-rays. Obviously, you need to know about CT scans as well, ultrasound. But yeah, this should get you up to speed with the lungs. Maybe in my next video, I will talk about the heart. And yeah, we'll take it from there. Thank you very much. See you in the next video.